Welcome back to the Science of Self-Defense. This would be lesson number 3. We have spent the last 2 classes learning the fighting stance and executing many different blocks so that we don't get hit, because rule number 1 at our house is don't get hit. But when someone has just tried to hit me, the only way that you can be relatively certain that he's not going to try to hit you again is to cause a little bit of pain to him. Now, I'm not saying that to be mean. It's just a reality of life. If you've got a bully out there, or a mugger, or a rapist, or a killer, and he takes one shot at you but misses, he's not going to just stand back and say, well, gee, that's too bad. I'm not going to do that again. He's coming at you again. So your choices are this. You can stand here and block all day long, and if your blocks are really good, you'll be able to block for a while, but eventually something's going to get through, because a block is a reaction. So we want to have counter strikes in our arsenal, and that's what we start working on today. As you recall, the first block you learned was an inward block. We said we're standing here, the hands are in position on the outside of our body, which means as we step back away from an incoming punch or grabbing attempt, this hand is the one that's set in position to come across with a block most conveniently. It's the hand that is most frequently going to be available because we don't spend much time cross-arm. It's a powerful tool. It's the most frequently used tool. So what do we set ourselves up for when we execute an inward block? Well, keep in mind that when someone is attempting to punch or grab you, they've got some momentum. They are coming forward. Okay? If I'm the bad guy and you're over there, there's forward motion involved in me trying to hit you. So you have to take that into account. Now, when you step back, you are going to force that person to extend his efforts. He's going to try to reach further, in other words. And as the inward block comes around, it's going to direct his hand and his whole body in that direction a little bit. But it's going to do one more thing that just simply doesn't get talked about enough, and that is it's going to kind of pull him towards you a shade. Because as you're stepping back, when this makes contact with his arm here, it's going to stay in contact. We're not going to just bounce it off. It stays in contact. We block through it because we want to make sure his punch or grab attempt is deflected far enough that it won't hit us. And by doing that as we're stepping back, there's a certain pulling motion that comes with it. So inward blocks are at least somewhat likely to pull the person forward just a shade, unless you hit at the very end of their arm, right down on the wrist or something. We're going to assume that it hits a little bit higher and that he is pulled in. So what does that set him up for? Okay, now the bad guy's over there. I'm giving you a side view here. If I'm stepping back, he's reaching out to hit or grab me, and this pulls him in a little bit. His hand is going to be back about here. That means his head's going to be about here somewhere, and he's going to be coming forward. This hand, as you recall, we get it up into this position as we're blocking so that it can block other things. That is also loading it up for our potential counter strike. If we just let it hang in the breeze, it hasn't really affected the efficiency or the efficacy of the block, but it's not loaded up either. So when we step back, execute an inward block, we've got our hand here, we've brought his arm past us, it's out here, and it doesn't matter if his arm is high or low, as you'll see just in a minute. This first counter strike that we're going to execute is called an inward elbow strike. This is the elbow, this is inward, and we strike that direction with it. Now, depending on how far he has come in, it will either be more of a body rotation, as you see here, or if he hasn't fallen that far forward, or if he's got really long arms of some sort and his head's still further, the strike is going to go more to the front. Okay? So either way is fine. You've got a rotation to practice after the inward block, inward elbow, inward block, inward elbow, or we can hit forward like so. Now, I reached out that time to give myself an imaginary target. I need to explain 2 things about that. First off, sometimes the person will get into a position where you can, in fact, grab his head. If you grab the back of the head before you hit him with an inward elbow, lights out. Because his head cannot go back with the impact. It's like being backed up to a wall and run into by a car. It is done. But don't worry about whether or not you can grab somebody's head. It's only going to happen occasionally, but just know that it's an opportunity to do it. When you are practicing grabbing someone's head for those eventualities, do not go block, elbow, and slap your arm. Okay? Go block, give a target, and hit forward with the body torque with your elbow. Makes sense, right? I know that it makes perfect sense to you up here, but just watch out because your body will mess with you and you'll start slapping your arm because, wow, that sounds cool. Beware, okay? Practice it so that it makes sense from a physiological standpoint, just like we explained it here. So let's practice that some together now. Okay, I'd like you to step back with your left foot, execute a right inward block, and once you're in position, come forward with a right elbow strike. Okay, this hand is here, this hand gets out of the way. Okay, again, step back inward block, elbow strike. Again, step back inward block, elbow strike. Again, block, strike. Again, block, strike. Again, block, strike. One more time, block, strike. If you achieved a comfort level over the last week or two with your fighting stance in the inward block, I'm be willing to bet this is already pretty comfortable to you because it's a nice natural movement because, golly, wasn't that what I said we're going to teach you? Natural things that work. Let's switch to the other side. You step back with your right foot, execute a left inward block, and then a right inward elbow strike. Okay, again, step back, inward block, inward elbow. Again, block, elbow. Again, block, elbow. Again, block, elbow. Okay? That's how they match up. The important part that we're teaching today is the elbow strike, but we have to put it in context of the inward block so you have kind of a feel of what's going on. The important thing for you to practice this week is the elbow strike so that you get your hips, your whole body into it. If it is already perfectly matched up for you, go ahead and do it with the inward block if you want to, although we are going to emphasize that combination of block strike in a couple weeks. But if you're already comfortable, go ahead. Okay? Now what happens, however, if when the person has attacked us, he's a little further back? And we step back here, and this is just not going to reach because an elbow strike has no reaching power that way, so to speak. It's got a lot of good rotational force. It's anchored strong. You're using powerful muscles of the body. If somebody's close enough to get hit with an elbow, they're probably going to take a snooze. But they won't always get that close. And in that case, we want to execute what's called a knife hand strike. Now, from a fighting stance, I'm already in one, a knife hand strike would be, well, your hand is up here for some reason, and you probably guessed by now it's because we just did an inward block, but it rolls out to the front. Now, I want you to notice the hand and the arm is at somewhere between a 45 and 30 degree angle. We do not try to strike straight to the front like that. You've already bent your wrist. It's an awkward move at the elbow. It's putting stress on all of the rotator muscles. It's just not a good thing to do. If we're going to use a knife hand strike, it's slightly to the side of the neck. If you were using your right hand like this against me, you would be hitting to the front side of the neck, maybe a little bit to the side. Now, if I've moved a little bit, all of a sudden the front of the neck becomes a good target, doesn't it? Okay. If you're hitting to the front of the neck, you're hitting the windpipe. If you damage the windpipe, people cannot breathe. If they can't breathe, they can't attack you. It is a potentially fatal move, so don't horse around with people doing this. If it's a drunk friend at a Christmas party, do not smack them in the windpipe just because they pushed you and kidding around, or even if they said something obnoxious. This is a life and death situation. When you hit to the carotid arteries over here, it is just as deadly a situation. If you rupture one of those, you're gone within about 10 seconds. Strangely enough, you've got about 30 seconds because of the air that's in your lungs you can survive if you get your windpipe crushed. But both of them cause panic. Okay? So they're both really, really good targets. But once again, don't try to artificially shove it to the front. Match up with me on this time, okay? Step back with your left foot, get into a fighting stance, reach up somewhere near your left ear with your right hand, and then roll it out to the front. Notice it's a rolling motion as it pushes away from you. Notice when it finishes, it's at a slight angle. Okay? You see how the arm extends at the elbow? I'm going to change angles for you. Okay? It's a little bit of a tricky, it's not that it's hard to do, it's just not a movement you've done much unless you've run around putting karate chops on people, which doesn't help. Okay, now, I'm going to call in a couple training aids. I've been saying for several weeks now, use the mirror in your bathroom or on the back of your door, your dressing mirror, something like that, to practice with, to give targets. And right now, we've got one camera set up to give you an angle here on the mirror that I use when I'm training in this room. At the same time, this is Bob. Bob is ordinarily weighted with water in his bottom end. Bob also ordinarily lives down in the larger training room downstairs where we get a little more rigorous, but the acoustics down there are not so great. That's why we use the room that usually gets for yoga and Pilates, things of that sort, for recording. But for now, focus on the mirror. Hopefully the angle shows you that at the mirror, if I'm rolling this, I'm aiming at my neck. Now my eyes see my hand hitting at the neck. Okay? And that's what your eyes would see. Hopefully the camera sees roughly my hand hitting at the front corner or the sides of the neck. Because that's what I want you to see when you're practicing at home. Okay? Roll it out like so. Okay, now to bring Bob into the picture, if he had just taken a swing at me with his right hand, he's going to end up turned a little bit, just as you can see he is here. Now, since we were lined up on the mirror before, I'm going to have Bob walk over here. Okay, so Bob threw this right punch. He threw it so hard he threw his arm away. By the way, Bob is also available online. It's a handy training aid. Okay, to have something to make contact with, but don't rush out and buy one yet. Get your basics really solid before you start hitting things that are hard so you avoid making your hand too sore, breaking bones. But at any rate, so Bob threw the punch that I had blocked, and in this case, he's got enough angle that I'm able to go to the front of his throat. Okay? There's no water in him now, that's why I'm pulling it off, otherwise he flops and hits the ground and say, gee, what a terrible training partner he is. Okay? But it rolls out like so. And if he had ended up more straight, there goes the carotid arteries. Are there other targets for a knife hand? Yep, but those are the best ones. If his hand really ends up high, ribs work too. And just like I told you not to worry when you were practicing the inward elbow about what you were hitting, that's the same concept here. Because if his hand is carried down low by the inward block, the inward elbow will go high, or the knife hand will go high. If his hand deflects up for some reason, the inward elbow can go to the ribs, or the knife hand can go to the ribs. Think about them both ways, practice them both ways, but do not obsess with aiming for a specific target. And the reason I say that is very simple. A head is a small object, And when someone is trying to attack you, it moves. Okay? It is hard to hit a moving target. I just absolutely get worn out when I watch somebody present a super training video that tells you, well, when he tries to attack, poke him in the eye. Do you have any idea just how hard it is for one finger to hit one eye that's bobbing around on a head you're trying to get to? And if you miss the eye, there goes 1 or 2 or 3 fingers on your hand, you're out of the situation right then. You can't resist if you've just broken your hand. So don't worry about the specifics now, get the mechanics down. In later episodes, we'll go to more specifics dealing, but let's make sure that we're ready to deal with the specifics before you try to do something that will only injure yourself. All of that being said to say, okay, so that's the knife hand. Once again, we'll put it in combination with an inward block later on, so we don't need to really practice it now, but for your practice it at home, roll it away and do it off of both sides, obviously. Okay? Like everything else we've practiced, our goal is to get to 350 repetitions of this, 350 perfectly executed repetitions. Once again, don't do them all at one time. 30 maybe at the most, maybe 50 if you're really well conditioned. But if you practice too long and they start to get sloppy, then you're practicing them wrong. Even if you intend to be practicing them right, if your body can't execute them perfectly on time number 50, you went too far. Over-enthusiasm can mess up more karate students than lack of enthusiasm. It sounds corny, but it's true. I've seen it happen way too often. Okay, so now we have had a very close range inward elbow strike. We've had a slightly longer range knife hand strike. And now it's time to roll out the big guns. The backhand in the fighting stance, well, it's been sitting around here for these first 2 strikes and during all the blocks, just saying, well, it's here in case something comes around and it can block it just by being in the way. But by being in the way, by being in that position I've shown you, what it's done is loaded itself up. Just like in the knife hand, having it here for a starting point, it was loaded. This is going to be loaded. We don't want the load to be an artificial thing. If I step back, for instance, if I did an outward block, I would never follow it with a knife hand because I would have to go block, load, knife hand. That's 1, 2, 3 steps. Never works. With putting it behind an inward block, you've got an inward block and a knife hand. It goes right through it. So that's the reason for having different blocks available and different strikes available. Back to the reverse punch. It does not exactly translate out of Japanese as reverse punch. It's more like rear hand punch or something like that, because that's what it is. It doesn't matter how it got there. It's not that we're punching in reverse, it's your rear hand that's going to do the punching. Now, why did I just spend all that time? Because I did have one young boy in class one time, the reverse punch, he goes, what? What did I fail to say to make the point on him, okay? I don't know. It was worth a chuckle. I can still kind of wake up chuckling sometimes at night about him on that one. We are in a fighting stance. We have done something, or we haven't done anything in the way of blocks. And you'll see what I mean by that later on. But just assume that we're standing here. Keep the front hand out of the way. This hand is going to come straight forward to execute the punch, and it's going to end up, for now, solar plexus high on yourself. As the hand is coming forward, it's not just an arm punch. Anybody can arm punch. Fortunately, that's what thugs on the street kind of do, is they arm punch, which means they just don't have much power. This punch, however, drives forward, and it drives forward from the very bottom of your rear foot. When you start the hand coming forward, you have already started straightening out your rear leg. Okay? You've got your calf muscles driving into it. We're not overly concerned with the heel staying glued to the floor because most people just aren't that flexible, but we don't want you up on your tiptoes either because that's truly unstable. So keep the foot fairly flat, drive into it by straightening out the rear leg, rotating the hips, and to facilitate the hip rotation, you bend the front knee just a little bit more than it started out when we were in the fighting stance. The fighting stance, as you recall, we have a 50-50 weight distribution. When we extend all the way to executing the reverse punch, we've got about a 70-30% weight distribution. Now, we don't want to start in a 70-30, or we don't have any body weight to put forward to add momentum, the benefits of our body weight to the punch. Then, once again, all we have is an arm with a little rotation punch. We want our body weight to be driving forward. It's very similar to a person that runs track coming out of the starting blocks. You've probably seen them. They're down. They say, position, rise to your mark, go. And when it's go, that right leg explodes out. And you watch the good sprinters, you'll see it. That's what we want to imitate here. So we have started in a fighting stance. As this hand starts to come out, this hand floats. It stays in front. Now, a quick aside for those of y'all that have some prior training in another system. Some systems want that front hand pulled back violently. It's called a reaction arm. And it will, in fact, do two things. It will make you more conscious of rotating your body with the punch. And it will add, just because of the weight of the arm, the momentum coming back against your center of your body, which is your pivot point, it will add a fractional amount of power to the punching arm, but it is fractional. Okay? I practice it both ways when I'm working on certain things, but for our purposes today, we're doing strictly self-defense. And because of that, I don't want you to stand here and go, you're wide open, okay? In the other direction, we have a group of people who say, okay, I'm punching through my guard, punching through the guard. Now that's an acceptable way of thinking of it, but it's not as strong a way of thinking of it as I want you to employ. What I want you to think of is the fact that we are punching with this hand and this one's getting loaded up for something else. Okay? And there's lots of something else's that this hand's going to be able to do. So when you're executing the reverse punch, we start off with 50-50 weight distribution, one shoulder width wide, 1.5 or so long. As we come forward with the hand, our leg has already been straightening in the rear, and we punch to full extension, hitting solar plexus high on ourself. Remember, 2 knuckles, okay? Just like we worried about them being lined up for blocks, we make sure they're lined up for punches. Most of us, when we hit solar plexus high on ourselves, the neutral position of the arm, which we also discussed, is going to end up with our hand being at about a 45-degree angle. You recall, I also said that it does vary on some people, so don't obsess with it, okay? When we're punching head high, neutral for most people is in a vertical position. And when we're punching a little bit lower, if you're trying to come down, hitting around belly button high, getting onto the bladder, maybe the fist coming over all the way is the most neutral position, so that the muscles on both sides of your arm can be supporting the motion. If we've already over-rotated one, we've stretched all these and totally relaxed these, and there's no support. If we're at that halfway point, when we tense them just before the instant of impact, we have a very, very solid battering ram hitting forward. Now, just like we did in practicing the knife hand strike, we want to use the mirror for a striking target, or a bob, okay? When you're here, you're lined up thinking, okay, I'm going to punch, so I've got to start pushing forward, because your punching arm will be able to travel faster than you're able to shove forward with your leg and rotate your hips. So you start the shove, here comes the punch, it goes all the way out. Now notice, the hips are fully rotated, the shoulders are fully rotated, the front knee has bent a little further. With these lightweight uniforms, it does not look like the leg is straight, but it is. The back leg has gone straight. The arm has gone to full extension, but that's not to say to full lockout. You don't want to lock out an elbow when you do anything. Two reasons. First off, it puts your elbow at risk. Second off, that tells you that you have punched too far for where the target should be. You want to hit the target when you've got a little arm travel left, back right there. You want to hit it. You want to be able to move into the target 2 inches, maybe 3. Okay? You do not want to go, if that's all the medicine you've got, he stays sick, and you probably get mugged. On the other hand, you don't want to be so close when you execute a punch that you could have punched all the way through his body, because it hits too soon. Your weapon, your punching hand, has not gotten up to its full speed yet, so it's traveling slower, and slower is less powerful, because the mass times the velocity is the force by physics, and we want to have as much velocity as we can get. So this would be a push, this would be a pat, that would be a correctly distanced punch. Distancing is of the utmost importance in what we do. It will only come with practice. Failing to distance properly is the easiest mistake to make, because unless you have a target, and I do not want you punching your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister, your siblings, your kids, anything like that. Don't say, here, let me punch you a couple times. Even if it's your first try, you may just nail it perfect and break some ribs. These things break bones. That's what they're made to do. Okay, an adult male, properly trained and reasonably conditioned, is going to be able to break 3 1-inch pine boards that are cut into 12-inch by 12-inch, being held or being secured into a holding bracket with a reverse punch. 1 rib roughly equates to 1 board being broken. If you have a reasonably well-trained 12-year-old, they can break a board. Like I said, a well-trained adult will put 3 of them out. So do not be casual with how you practice and mess around with friends. Just don't mess around with friends. Now, Bob costs right at $300. If you're committed to what you're doing, having Bob in your garage or in your room, wherever you're going to practice, could be an excellent investment. I don't sell Bobs. Bob is made by Century Martial Arts. Okay? They're not paying me to say that. I'm just saving you time on the internet. And he's called Bob. If you're really serious, think about it. This type of arrangement of a water-based stand also comes with just a bag hanging there. That works really well too. Having Bob helps when you're explaining things to new students so they have a perspective of what you're hitting and how you're hitting it. But there's not much down there to practice kicks on and things of that sort. They do have a newer Bob. You notice this guy, he's kind of short-waisted. They've got a new one that's a longer-waisted Bob that's a little bit better, but he's also a little more expensive. So consider a target if you're going to really be serious about your training, not to mention the fact that it's the fun part, whale away on it. You know, if you come home at the end of the day and somebody's really annoyed you at work, say, okay, Jake said this at work. Jake, you're my target. You put Jake across the guy's forehead, wear this guy out. And I'm not kidding about that. I have a few students that do exactly that. They're just in a very tense work environment. And they come home and work it out, and the next day they go back, and they're able to deal with Jake in a civil manner because they wore him out last night at home. Okay, today we talked about the inward elbow strike, the knife hand strike, and the reverse punch. Before we sign out, I want to do a few more reverse punches with you. I will start off with my right foot back. You start with your left foot back. Fists closed, hands in position. Roll the punch out to full extension. Pull it back. Okay, thrusting the leg and hips and shoulders, roll it out and back. Again, punch, recover, punch, recover, punch, recover, punch, recover. If it's in front of a mirror, remember what you're going to be seeing. Punch, recover, punch, recover. Switch sides with me. Your right foot goes back, left hand comes up in front, both fists closed. Okay? Thrusting with the rear leg. Punch comes forward, punch comes back. Punch comes forward. Don't rush the speed. You've got plenty of time. And back. Get the accuracy down first, and back, forward, and back, forward, and back, forward, and back. On this technique in particular, if you spend the first 200 or 250 of your practice strikes in total slow motion like we just did, it will not be time wasted. It will not be. There's always room for improvement. Okay, I hope you found this session informative, enlightening, and reasonably pleasurable, even with all my other asides. Look forward to seeing you next time.